You're not waiting anymore. And somewhere on the other side of that silence, they feel it. Not because you sent a message, not because you said anything, but because you stopped. And that stopping, that's louder than anything you could have typed. Here's what most people get wrong about being ghosted. They think the person who disappeared holds all the power. They think the one who waits, who checks their phone, who replays the last conversation looking for what went wrong. They think that person is losing. But what if the power dynamic was never what it looked like? What if the moment you stopped waiting, truly stopped, something shifted in them that they weren't prepared for? Why do ghosters come back? Why do they watch your stories but never say a word? Why does their silence have such a strange quality to it, like it's listening? By the end of this, you'll understand the psychological mechanism behind ghosting regret. Not the surface version, the real one. The one that explains why moving on creates more pull than any message you could send, and why the person who disappeared is often the one who ends up more unsettled. If this kind of psychological insight is what you're here for, subscribe. New content drops regularly. Let's reframe this entire situation, because most people think ghosting is a statement. They think it means, I'm done, I don't care, you don't matter. That's the surface reading, and it's almost always wrong. Ghosting is not indifference. Ghosting is avoidance dressed as indifference. There's a difference, and that difference is everything. When someone avoids, they're managing something, an uncomfortable emotion, a decision they haven't made yet, a version of you they still haven't resolved in their mind. Avoidance requires energy. True indifference requires none. So the person who ghosted you isn't necessarily someone who felt nothing. They're often someone who felt something they didn't know how to handle, and disappearing felt easier than facing it. That distinction changes the entire picture, because now you're not dealing with someone who erased you. You're dealing with someone who paused you, filed you somewhere in their psychology they haven't fully processed. And as long as you're waiting, as long as you're available, they don't have to. Your availability is what keeps their avoidance comfortable. When that availability disappears, the dynamic changes, and that's when regret begins to surface. There are phases to this, and they don't happen all at once. The first phase is what you could call the illusion of control. When someone ghosts, they experience an immediate sense of relief. The discomfort is gone. The decision has been made by not making it. And in that first window, days, sometimes weeks, they feel like they're in control of the situation. Externally, there's nothing, silence. Internally, they're telling themselves a story, that they needed space, that they weren't ready, that they're doing you both a favor. Whatever narrative keeps the discomfort manageable. The emotional dynamic here is simple. They have all the options. You're waiting. They're choosing. Or so they think. Because this phase has an expiration date. The second phase is what happens when they start checking. They look at your profile, your stories, your posts, not out of indifference, out of something they'd probably call curiosity, but that runs a little deeper than that. They're tracking whether you're still in position, still available, still affected. As long as you are, nothing shifts internally. Your pain or your patience is just confirmation that the dynamic is what they think it is. You're still there. They still have the option. Externally, still nothing, still silence. But internally, a low-level monitoring begins. They're aware of you in a way they don't fully acknowledge. The third phase begins when they notice something different. You've changed. Maybe your energy online is different. Maybe you've stopped engaging with content they'd expect you to engage with. Maybe you just seem somewhere else, less present in the space they'd been watching. This is where the psychology shifts in a way most people don't anticipate, because they were watching for confirmation that you were waiting, and they're no longer finding it. Externally, they may do nothing, but internally, something unsettles. The story they've been telling themselves, that you're still there, that the option remains open, that they're the one in control, starts losing its foundation. The fourth phase is where regret begins to take a shape. Not remorse, necessarily, not guilt, but a specific kind of discomfort that comes from realizing a window may have closed. Here's the psychological reality. Most people don't want what they have comfortable access to. Availability decreases perceived value. It's not a flaw in human psychology. It's a feature. We're wired to notice scarcity, to want what isn't easily obtained. When you were waiting, you were available. And available things don't create urgency. When you stopped waiting, genuinely stopped, You became something different in their mental model, something that requires more effort to reach, something that may not be accessible anymore. And that's when the discomfort arrives with weight. The fifth phase doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's decisive. It's the moment they reach back out, or consider it seriously enough that it occupies real mental space. Not because they've resolved anything, not because they've grown, often because the psychological discomfort of losing access becomes louder than whatever discomfort made them disappear in the first place. They reach back, or they carry the regret quietly. Either way, you've already moved. Here's where most people go wrong. When someone ghosts, the natural response is to wait and hope, to stay available, to keep checking, to craft a message that explains the situation better, or asks for closure, or tries to reopen something that went quiet. That impulse makes sense emotionally, but it does the opposite of what most people want. Every time you reach out from a place of need, you confirm that the dynamic is exactly what they assumed it was. You are still in position. They still have the option. Nothing has changed. And that means they don't have to change either. Compare that to a different response, not a strategic one, not a performance, a real one. You stop waiting because you've decided that waiting isn't where your life is going to be spent. You're not angry, you're not cold, you're just done holding the door open. That shift, when it's genuine, is felt. Not through any message, not through any post, just through the texture of your presence in the world, which they've been quietly monitoring more than you know. The difference isn't tactical, it's psychological. One response keeps you in the dynamic, the other exits it. And the moment you exit it, you stop being something they have access to. You become something they had. There are principles behind this. Let's make them concrete. The first is what you could call the scarcity recalibration. The psychological mechanism is simple. Perceived value rises when access decreases. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding that your constant availability communicates something about how you value your own time and attention. When you recalibrate, when you genuinely invest yourself elsewhere, you change how you're perceived without saying a single word. The behavioral guidance is this. Stop monitoring. Stop the check-ins, the story views, the quiet waiting. Not as a strategy, as a decision about how you want to live. The second principle is emotional sovereignty. The mechanism here is that as long as your internal state depends on their response, they hold leverage they didn't even earn. Every time their silence affects your day, you've handed control to someone who isn't even present. Emotional sovereignty means your stability is no longer contingent on their behavior. That's not detachment. That's power. The behavioral guidance: notice when your mood shifts because of something they did or didn't do. Then ask yourself, do I want this person to have that much control over my internal state? And act accordingly. The third principle is the silence audit. Most people fill silence with noise, messages sent, explanations given, social media activity designed to signal something. But silence, when held with intention, communicates more than most people understand. The mechanism, silence without need, is powerful. Silence from desperation is loud. The difference is your internal state, and people can feel it. The behavioral guidance. Before you send any message, ask whether you're sending it from a place of genuine connection or from anxiety. If it's anxiety, sit in the silence instead. Let it work. The fourth principle is presence over performance. Showing up online in ways designed to get someone's attention is performance, and performed confidence is transparent. What actually registers, what actually shifts dynamics, is genuine presence. You engaging with your own life because it interests you, not because someone is watching. The mechanism, authenticity, creates gravity. Performance repels. The behavioral guidance: ask what you'd actually be doing with your time if this situation didn't exist. Then do that. The fifth principle is the non-negotiable standard. This one is less about them and more about you. Most people don't have clearly defined standards for how they allow themselves to be treated. And without that clarity, they negotiate down, waiting longer, accepting less, rationalizing behavior that doesn't work for them. The mechanism. When your standard is clear and you enforce it calmly, you stop being someone who can be managed through avoidance. You become someone with a floor. The behavioral guidance. Define what you will and won't accept. Not to announce it, but to know it internally, and then let that knowledge govern your decisions. Now let's go deeper than tactics, because this situation, being ghosted, waiting, wondering, finally letting go, this is not just about one person. It's a mirror of how you relate to your own value. Every time you wait for someone to confirm that you're worth their time, you're outsourcing a decision that belongs to you. Every time you hold the door open, hoping they'll walk back through, you're telling yourself their choice matters more than yours. This is the real thing this situation is asking you to look at, not why did they leave. But why does their leaving determine how you see yourself? You don't react, you observe. You don't chase, you choose. You don't explain your worth, you know it. That shift from someone who waits to be chosen to someone who is constantly choosing, that's not something that happens because of a tactic. It happens because you decide who you are independent of what anyone else does. And when that shift is real, when it's not performed but actually lived, it changes everything. Not just how others see you, how you move through the world. Zoom out for a moment. The person who ghosted you was navigating something. Fear, confusion, immaturity, avoidance, you may never know exactly what. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with the space they left, because that space is either a wound you keep reopening or it's room for something different to grow. Self-worth isn't built by being chosen. It's built by the standards you hold when you're not being chosen, by the clarity you maintain when someone treats you as an option, by the life you continue to build regardless of who's watching or who stopped watching. Emotional intelligence isn't about reading people better. It's about needing to read them less. It's about being stable enough in yourself that other people's behavior is interesting information, not a verdict. That's the real outcome of this kind of situation, if you let it be. Not getting them back, not getting closure, getting clear. You don't need someone to return to prove your value. You don't need their regret to confirm that losing you was a loss. You already know what you bring. The question is whether you're living like you do.